All right. Are we ready to get started?
I am.
Okay, wonderful. Chapters 46 through 50.
Yes.
I have some big questions that I want to ask.
Do you want to ask them first and then we'll try to answer them as we go?
You read my mind. So at first I thought, well, we'll start with the big questions. And then I thought, I'll just mention them. We'll answer them at the end, but then they'll be in the back of our minds as we go. So the big questions are basically, why is Tess the ideal, the pure woman? Why is Tess the pure woman? What is the moral status of Alec? I think we answered that last time with Joseph's chapter title, Alec is the worst. I think Hardy agrees with that. Alec is the worst. But what is it about him that makes him the worst? And we have plenty of material in these chapters to draw from for that question. And then where does Angel fall in all of this? And I have thoughts about that too. I'm sure you do too, Grace, but I'll withhold them for now. But kind of in assigning moral responsibility for what happens to Tess, where does Angel fall in that? I think is the question that I'm thinking about. So we'll keep those in mind as we go and go back to chapter 46.
So you're hoping to, do I understand correctly, you're hoping to kind of like on the scale of morality, find where people fit?
Yeah, not so much a scale as just, there's a lot of discussion in these chapters about moral responsibility, mostly by Alec, who, whether Alec seems, well, I have thoughts about him, but I'm going to save them. But he sometimes is assigning blame on himself. He's sometimes pointing the finger in another direction. So it's not so much a scale as how are we meant to regard them in the sense of their own moral responsibility, and how does it fit into the role of individual evil men versus the role of society in what happens to Tess.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
Okay. So chapter 46. With these chapters, if there's one image that's going to recur to mind chapter after chapter, it's Alec appearing again.
My gosh, yes.
Comes back.
Every chapter he shows up in, like, it seems like the level of scariness goes up.
Absolutely. He's the devil by the time we get to the end. So the level of scariness goes up, and then it's almost amusing, but it's not, that Hardy he appears on the scene and you don't at first know that it's Alec, but you really do.
You know.
Even when he's just a dot on the horizon,
You're like, I know who that is.
You know who it is. Shoshana.
Okay, well, maybe it's too much levity, but if you've ever seen the movie Jaws and you start hearing that music, okay, all right, so that's Alec, and you start hearing that music, and could it be? How could he have gotten here? But there he is, because he's the evil that never goes away.
Yes.
So,
yes. Ooh, yeah.
Okay, so let's see, chapter 46. I don't know. Do you want to start? Do you have a title for chapter 46? Did you want to start with that?
I do. And I don't know that it gets to the heart of like the theme of the chapter, but I do like it for its drama. I chose 4
titles for this one because I could not decide. I chose one as the first, but we'll see if they happen to overlap with any of my favorites.
I chose this one for the drama of it. Corpses of those old black passions.
Oh. No, I missed that. I think I missed that phrase.
Oh, okay.
So where does that one come up?
I underlined it. Let me find it.
Okay. All right.
It's towards the end.
So while you look for that, the one that I settled upon was no ethics without dogma. Because there was so much discussion in this chapter of Alec, Alec putting the blame on himself, but at the same time, saying things like, you have been the cause of my backsliding. So
yeah,
does he really regard himself as to blame, or does he blame her?
Right.
My impression is that what is fundamental to Alec is his desire for Tess and his complete disconnect from all meaningful moral standards. So everything about ethics for him just feels like rationalization for whatever he wants to do in the moment.
Right.
Or some kind of freakish, that was another phrase I loved, the freak of a careless man. So his mother dies and he decides to reform himself, but it's so superficial and shallow, and it's just the impulse of a moment. And he has no moral compass in reality whatsoever. And he admits that in a very powerful form.
Right. Yeah.
So let's see. What order do I do in here? Okay, so I chose. So
whenever you want.
I'm curious. Do people agree with me that he calls upon moral standards or makes moral accusations or puts blame on himself, but it usually seems there usually seem to be contradictions within what he says, and ultimately it usually seems to serve the purpose of him getting a hold of Tess again. The moment he sees her, that's his ambition, and it feels to me phony every time he tries to justify coming back to her as some kind of moral impulse on his part. Doesn't seem like there's any trace, maybe that's too strong. It doesn't seem like it's motivated by goodness. It's just motivated by lust and desire for her.
Yes, absolutely. And then trying to take the blame off of himself as well for his backsliding. He's like just going to attribute it to her.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about that? It's a pretext, I see. I was surprised how quickly he dropped the whole religion thing. Yeah. It was the freak of a freakish impulse of the moment, and it had no power to withstand the actual physical presence of Tess.
Well, and it fits in with his character before too, to just kind of like he just goes with his whims. Like he did feel moments of kindness, legitimate kindness toward her when he was like, back in the beginning when they were back at Trantridge, he was like, I won't touch you against your will. Like, and we talked about how he did mean that at the time, but he, then had a different whim later. And so then we see that, he had a whim to become a preacher, and he did. And now his whims take him back to Tess.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let's look at a couple of the things he says. He says, let me get the context for this again. He says, she says, why do you trouble me so? She cried. And he says, I trouble you. I think I may ask, why do you trouble me? Mm-hmm. So that's that ambiguity of moral responsibility. Yeah. He's the one taking action to come to her again, after she repeatedly has asked him to leave her alone. Yeah. And yet he is ascribing action to her. She's troubling him. She's troubling him by the sheer fact of her beauty and allure and attractiveness to him. That's what she's doing to trouble him. So trouble him seems to assign active responsibility to her to
for existing
in that way. But that's the same thing that he'll renounce that idea when he's explicitly talking about moral standards and moral responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or this, the religious channel is left dry forthwith, and it is you who have done it.
Mm-hmm.
oh, did I skip a chapter? Shoot.
Oh yeah, I do think that that's from a different chapter.
I'm sorry. I need to go backwards. That was chapter 47. Okay. So my apologies. Let's go back. Chapter 46 is when the black speck appears, and we know even a black speck is Alec.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. So the same theme, different quotes. He says, the whole blame was mine, the whole unconventional business of our time at Tantridge. All right. So he's saying the blame is his. The unconventional business of our time at Tantridge, that to me, that follow-up phrase completely undermines the phrase, the whole blame was mine, to describe raping a woman as unconventional business.
Unconventional business. Yeah. Like, what a euphemism.
Yeah. And then it is a shame for parents to bring up their girls in such dangerous ignorance of the gins and nets the wicked may set for them. He's talking about himself as the wicked, but where's blame being assigned here? On parents who don't sufficiently protect their children against people like him.
Right. And you know, I think we can all agree that her parents did a bad job and a bad thing, but that doesn't mean that like it was okay for him to rape her.
Right.
But he's trying to make that justification.
And then he says, okay, when he tries to, when he asks her to be his wife and she refuses, it says, and as he asked the question, a disappointment, oh, that's not the question, will she be his wife, but the question of why she can't be his wife.
Right. Yeah.
Because as he asked the question, a disappointment, which was not entirely the disappointment of thwarted duty, crossed D'Urberville's face. I sensed a little sarcasm in that. I'm curious whether that was right or not, because not entirely disappointment of thwarted duty. Is there any earnest sense of duty in him? I don't feel much of that. So it doesn't seem like it wasn't just not entirely the disappointment of thwarted duty. It feels stronger.
Right.
Than that to me.
It seems like he, you know, he is this like whimsical person. And so, you know, his whims right now are like, I really do want Tess to marry me. Like, I really do. That's my desire. And so then when she can't, then he is, I think, actually disappointed because he wants to marry her. Now he does.
But does he want to marry her out of a sense? I mean, I don't know, maybe it doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. So there's the line later that I think is the most telling line about Alec of all, and I'll just skip to it now, where he says, there's no ethics without an explicit code being imposed upon me. He has no moral impulses. He has none of that connection to what's natural and right to human beings himself in his core, like we see in Tess, like we see somewhat in Angel, and like we see a little bit described even of Angel's parents, that there's an essential goodness in them that comes from them and not from a set of standards. And sometimes that, well, when it comes down to it, that natural goodness is superior to any moral standards, and often, and we've seen it now at odds with moral standards. But yeah, he for Alec, all he has is let's see, what was the phrase here? Okay, not entirely the disappointment of thwarted duty. So I guess he sort of ritualistically holds these conventional cultural standards and maybe feels some obligation, but it doesn't, it's not coming from him in any sense. So it just feels phony and forced, and not, there's nothing earnest about his commitment to moral standards.
Totally. I think that that's a much better way to describe it than anything that I've tried to come up with. Because there is this kind of, again, words fail, but you know, he, even when he's trying to do the right thing, he's still doing it in a really horrible
Mhm.
way. Like even when he does become a preacher, he's, this fire and brimstone sort of preacher. And so even when there is this code of ethics like imposed upon him, this written word that he has to follow, he does it like by the letter, without any room for interpretation or metaphor, I'll say. And so then, he finds out that she had his child and that this has been really hard for her. So he's like, okay, now the thing to do is to marry her. And so then when he can't, there's this disappointment. And I think he probably does experience it as a real disappointment, but not like, I look at it as
disappointment that he can't fulfill his moral obligation, you mean? Aside from, there's the disappointment of not getting Tess.
That.
And then you do feel like there's some disappointment in not having the opportunity to, you don't.
No, the disappointment I'm talking about is the disappointment of not being able to possess Tess, I'll say.
I'm going to check the chat since people aren't saying something out loud. Let's see. Yeah, he blames her beauty for everything he does. He feels attraction for her, but cannot care to acknowledge that his actions are his own. Sometimes he does, but that seems to be when he kind of reverts to this formulaic recitation of societal rules of morality. But that's what it feels like. There's no meaningful connection to those rules. It's just sometimes he blames himself when he says, oh yeah, by that code of ethics that we all subscribe to.
It's kind of my fault, I guess.
It's my fault. But it does feel like what has primacy is just his desire for her and his blame of her for causing his failure to live up to those standards.
Right. And I think there's that part where he says that he, was arranged to go preach at Casterbridge. And I shall not be there by reason of my burning desire to see a woman whom I once despised. No, by my word and truth, I never despised you. If I had, I should not love you now. And then this next part I thought was true, coming out of his mouth, which seemed important. Why I did not despise you was on account of your intrinsic purity in spite of all. You withdrew yourself from me so quickly and resolutely when you saw the situation. You did not remain at my pleasure. So there was one victim in the world for whom I had no contempt, and you are she. But
wow, that is not the word in my book.
Oh, really?
No, my version says there was one petticoat in the world for whom I had no contempt.
Oh, interesting.
Very. And that seems, petticoat seems so much more powerful because it's just women as such.
Yeah.
For all women.
Oh my gosh.
She refuses him.
I own this book.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, but yes. So he admired, I mean, I guess this is kind of akin to blaming her parents for not protecting her against him. It's like self-awareness of his own evil.
Right, yeah. And then, I don't know, does your book say the same thing at the end? I thought I worshipped on the mountains, but I find I still serve in the groves.
Oh, I'm not sure. I didn't write that one down. Serve in the groves. Okay, so just a few more from this chapter.
I thought that was particularly disgusting because of what he did to her in a grove.
Groves, yes.
But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no.
It's a biblical reference, and the fact that he's using a biblical reference to then call back to what happened. Ugh. Yeah. But anyway.
Okay, so a few other lines from 46 in terms of assigning blame. Mm-hmm. He says he asked her to marry him only for her sake. Well, we know that's patently false. Whether there's any trace of doing it for her sake, it's definitely not primarily for her sake.
No.
And then she says, what have I done? Again, this is the assigning activity to the fact of her beauty and attractiveness. But he says here, done nothing intentionally, but you have been the means, the innocent means of my backsliding, as they call it. First of all, in terms of undermining the moral seriousness of anything, just like that phrase I mentioned before, the whole unconventional business, backsliding. Backsliding is something you do on a diet.
Yeah.
Backsliding into harassing and pursuing a woman who has asked you repeatedly to just leave her alone, and
God,
to descend from what you believe is what he claims is morality into rejection of all moral standards. Backsliding does not quite capture it.
No, it does not. And then later in that same paragraph, he says, Tess, I was on the way to salvation till I saw you again, feverishly shaking her as if she were a child. And why then have you tempted me? I was firm as a man could be till I saw those eyes and that mouth again. Surely there never was such a maddening mouth since Eve's. You temptress Tess, you dear witch of Babylon, I could not resist you as soon as I met you again. So yeah, that's her fault.
It's her fault. So she's a temptress by the sheer fact of her existence. And he's the one who keeps appearing, predatorily appearing on the scene.
But he was firm as a man could be.
As firm as a man could be. All right. Oh, and the irony. Okay. Oh my gosh. Is this still 46, the buff glove?
No, I think that's in the next chapter.
What is wrong with my notes right now? Is that in 47?
I thought, but I might be wrong.
I think it's, let's see. No, this one actually is 371. Okay. So,
yeah, I think for mine, at least it's in 47. Oh, and I found the passage that has my chapter title in it. And I looked it up, and in your version, it is slightly different. So it says in mine, the corpses of those old black passions which had lain inanimate amid the lines of his face ever since his reformation seemed to wake and come together as in a resurrection. He went out indeterminately, hardly responsible for his acts.
Okay. Yeah. And now that I completely messed up the order of the chapters, and I see what happened. My chapter title for 46 was The Innocent Means of Backsliding.
Okay.
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. Okay, but the buff glove, it's in 46.
Oh, is it? For me, I think it's in 47.
That's weird. So our chapters are even broken down differently. In any case, I loved this moment. In an impulse, he turned suddenly to take her hand. The buff glove was on it, and he seized only the rough leather fingers, which did not express the life or shape of those within. That's all.
Oh, no, that part is in this chapter. I thought you were talking about when she hits him.
Oh, when she slapped him. Okay, no, that comes later. No, I just love the image of him seizing her, and all he gets is her glove. The exterior, because that's all he will ever get of Tess, nothing of the substance of her.
Yep.
And then I also just wanted to mention this moment where he becomes her defender against it says her defender whom she dreaded more than her assailant when she's approached by the farmer Groby, who says, what the devil are you doing away from your work at this time of day? So he treats her, cruelly and dictatorially, and that's vastly superior to the treatment in her mind that she gets from Alec. And this goes back to that quote I think we were talking about last week, where it said, at least there was no trace of gallantry in it.
Yes.
She much prefers to be abused in that sense than treated like prey sexually.
Right. And that's why she says, he won't hurt me. He's not in love with me.
Yes.
Kathleen.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. So now every time Alec pops up, I'm going to hear this in my head. Dun dun.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Yeah.
can really do the. I don't know if I can really do the Jaws theme appropriate, but that's just so perfect for him.
It
Yeah,
is.
it is.
Okay, I just had to share the Jaws theme.
I have a question about this chapter before we go on to the next one, where when she's talking about Angel's views of on religion,
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to talk
It's-
about that. I'm glad you
it
bring
says
up.
here she gave the negations, and the no negations are explicitly given. And then later it says, it keeps making reference to the arguments that Angel made. Now, first of all, just dramatically, the idea that she is giving Alec license to abandon the only thing that ties him to any sense of morality whatsoever, unwittingly, unintentionally giving him that license, and then closing the chapter with, that clever fellow little thought that by telling her those things, he might be paving my way back to her.
That gave me the chills.
Oh yeah, it's, and also the idea that the way that those two characters, Alec and Angel, are interconnected, both in his redemption and desire to become a preacher through Angel's father, and now through what he needed to be able to abandon all sense of morality unwittingly through Angel. And he still doesn't know who it is that Tess is married to. He doesn't know about this connection. So
He has no idea. Oh my gosh.
the dramatic irony there is amazing.
Yeah. It's really-
But anyway, did anyone have a thought about why the arguments against Christianity are omitted? Is it because that would be a bold thing for Hardy to do in the context of this novel? Is it because they'd be difficult to make compelling? I don't know. It felt, is it just because they're not what is essentially relevant?
That was kind of what I thought. My personal interpretation of it was just that it doesn't seem relevant, because the essential part to the story is not what the negations are, but the fact that she is able to then like indirectly convince Alec of these negations.
Yeah, I think that's true. But it did feel striking to me to have a line like, here she gave the negations. No,
right. Yeah.
And nothing to follow up.
I think it's possible that so the time period probably does have something to do with it, but I'm not a historian or an expert on that. So I don't want to talk too much about that, because I'm probably wrong. But the way that I understand it is that if she did list her negations there, then I think it would be really possible or even probable for a reader to look through it and get caught up in those negations, which might distract from it. Whole point.
That's interesting. Yeah, I remember having a class from Harry Binswanger once where he said, I forget his formulation of it, which was much better than what I'm going to give now. But he said something like, don't have your example distract from the point that's being made. If it's too dramatic an example, it's going to take your attention away from what's actually at hand.
Right. Yeah.
Molly, did you have something to say about that too? No. Okay. Shoshana?
Okay, well, here we've got one of many test examples in which we're told that she said something, but we're not told what she said. And I think that if we were actually there, it would be interesting, because we're told, for example, way back, that she confessed, she told Angel the story of what happened. And I think there's a question of, well, that's her own experience. She's not just repeating what somebody else said to her, but it would be, given that this was sort of an important moment. I mean, if we're watching, we would like to hear, because that's all that Angel knows.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the question, the thing is, you look at this and you think, okay, how should she be explaining what happened in a way that's not simply protective of herself, but accurate? And
Mhm.
instead we're told that she told him, and then he reacts the way that he does, but
We
he
don't
certainly,
hear.
yeah, he doesn't react very well, but possibly she set him up by, and then I did what I knew to be wrong,
Mhm,
whatever,
mhm,
we
mhm,
don't know. And
Yeah.
and here also she's got chances to explain things to Alec that she's
Yeah.
not explaining. And so what's interesting, of course, is that Hardy's got the gift of language, but he
Yeah.
doesn't give it to Tess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
And so here it's almost pathetic that she manages, you push the religion button and she manages to repeat things. And she even says, I don't know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
well, unfortunately, I wanted to believe what he believed, and this is what he believed. And what do you think? This shouldn't even be happening at all.
Mhm,
There's really only one thing she needs to say to Alec, and it's, something like, hell no.
mhm,
That's it.
mhm.
There's nothing else for them to talk about. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what happens when you start talking to, well, Satan in the Garden of Eden. He just sort of grabs on everything, and it turns out
Mhm,
all of a sudden that he's right and you're wrong, and we're not even going to talk about God, who's in all kinds of trouble. I mean,
mm,
so I think that that's part of what's going on here, is that we see it's even explicit. What's
mhm.
clear is that she doesn't understand what she's saying.
Right.
And
Right.
yet pathetically, because, well, this is all she's got of Angel now, is these things he used to say.
Yeah. So she's
So,
really committed them to memory, and she's able to deliver them to Alec in a way he can exploit and make use
yeah,
of.
yeah,
But
which is
mhm,
no good, because he's already got the fact that her alleged husband is not around.
mhm, yeah.
She told him that much, and she's
Yeah.
managed to not, I mean, it's of course a ridiculous situation for her to be in, but she's managed to conceal the utter ridiculousness of it from other people, and yet with him it comes out. And
Mhm,
it's no good. You feel, on the one hand, you feel very sorry for her, that
mhm,
because she's trying to be truthful, even
mhm,
even repeating things that Angel has told her, but
mhm.
that doesn't do any good.
So it seems like part of what makes her weak is her goodness in this case, because it's hard to imagine Tess defiantly stand eh, defiantly standing up to him.
Mhm.
She in the conversations over the course of these chapters, it does seem like she continually tries to allow that he might be motivated by good.
Mhm.
That slowly starts to recede into the background as he becomes more persistent and more predatory. But part of it seems to be just, that force in her that made the girls unable um, to ever bear her any resentment is the same thing that's making her weak and vulnerable here, because she won't pronounce moral condemnation.
And
of
even
him.
what we've been talking about with the her simple devotion to Angel, I think that what she does when she's kind of repeating the things that he knows without, or that he said without fully understanding them. I think that that's another example of that simple
Mhm.
devotion. She doesn't feel like she needs to understand that fully. She
Yes.
just wants her beliefs to align with his.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
she is able to repeat them like that without fully understanding, as an example of that simple devotion that she has towards him, which Hardy makes that part of her character, because he's trying to say that that's part of being a pure woman.
Right. So we might not view that exactly the same way that Hardy does, but he regards that as one of her virtues, this absolute pure devotion to Angel, without question, without doubting.
And that's another example of her goodness and her purity becoming a problem for her.
Yes. Yes. A problem. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I'll hold that question. So that's part of, the original question that I asked, is what makes her the pure woman. And one important aspect of this is her capacity to love without question. It's
Mhm.
interesting because it's just another kind of faith I mean,
It
it's
is.
just been transferred to the object of her love instead of the gospel, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would push back a little bit on this idea that it's just coming from her devotion from him to him, because I think it's that she has these ideas and she loves him because he's making sense of what she already thinks, and that's part of. So she pushes back when she comes up to an idea that she doesn't agree with the man painting the fence, and the one she ran into when her baby died and she was trying to get a proper burial for the baby. So like she pushes back on ideas that she doesn't agree with. And I don't think that that's just, she loves this guy and so she's just going to believe whatever he believes. She loves him because they share similar ideas. Sorry about the
That's okay. No. She does push back against ideas that she doesn't agree with. And I certainly don't want it to make it seem like she's just some, infatuated little, twit who just follows this man for, she's not that at all. She really, really loves him. But I think my impression is that Hardy thinks that love is true, that love is premised on something real. But once that love exists, she does become in the position of a worshiper and a devotee to her husband. And I think that goes back, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody here, but I think that goes back to what we've been talking about before, that women, he's positioning women as vulnerable to men, as in this position of vulnerability to men, because this devotion of hers is right and good. And it means that she's entrusting her welfare to Angel. And so far, he's betrayed that dependence of hers on him.
That's exactly that. Yes, that.
Okay. Any other thoughts about that? Does that make sense, Ginger? Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to be left with leaving the impression that I think it's just this foolish.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's real love, and when love is real, it's worthy of that kind of devotion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
Can I skip back to one more thing? Shoshana was talking about kind of how she doesn't have Hardy's gift of language.
Mhm.
And I think that every attempt at sharing the notes that she writes, that's another, like, just showing that she doesn't have a voice here.
Mm. Like the letter to Angel, is that what you're thinking of? Okay, what about that letter?
Well, we didn't actually hear what was written in it, and it didn't get to him.
The
So,
original one.
Both ways.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay. I was thinking you meant the letter she finally actually wrote and sent, and we're left wondering if it will ever get to him, or the caprices of the blighted star will just interfere in its path. But yeah, we do see that letter. Okay, we're progressing very slowly through this. It's good material.
That was a really long chapter, so
it was. That's fair. Okay, so now we can talk about the one I started talking about from the beginning, chapter 47. This is the one that I called No Ethics Without. Oh wait, sorry. No. Okay, no. So is there anything we want to wrap up from 47? One thing I wanted to observe and just ask for people's comments on, if you have them, is it seems like machinery itself is part of what is wrong with society and represents kind of tyrannical masculinity. And yeah.
Okay, so sorry, you said 47. We're starting 47 now, right?
So, yeah, well, we sort of started it already, so I don't
Okay.
know where we are. We're just like swimming around in it. Yeah.
Well, I did want to say that on that note about the machinery, I think you're absolutely right. It's like that mark of like industrialization, like hurting nature. And
You're getting
being
away
so-
from, so we've seen how the, natural impulses of man is what is good, and
Mhm.
technology, we saw it with the train delivering the food to places that people
right.
would
Right. Yeah.
never, yeah.
And so then with this chapter, we have the, is it a threshing machine? Is that what it is? Which is so like such a stark difference from the rest of the environment. And this is also when Alec shows up dressed as a fancy man.
Mhm.
And he clearly doesn't belong there either. So I've been kind of, I don't know, maybe you can tell me what you think. I've been kind of toying with the idea of this being like the threshing machine and Alec being kind of like a metaphor, like they both have a similar relation to the environment and to Tess, like the sense of like devouring or trying to devour what's around it, just like Alec is doing to Tess. I might be pushing it, but
I mean, it everything about the machine and the presence of Alec felt like the antithesis of Talbot's, right?
yeah.
Where it says of them, let's see. And in the indistinct figure, black, sustained with a sustained hiss that spoke of strength very much in reserve, a sooty and grimy embodiment of tallness. That this by the engine stood a dark, motionless being, a sooty and grimy embodiment of tallness in a sort of trance. He was in the agricultural world, but not of it. He served fire and smoke. Yeah, so it's just this thing that devours and is apathetic to even what it's doing. Beyond its extent, the environment might be corn, straw, or chaos. It was all the same.
And it's all the same. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I like underline this whole passage with the description of the threshing machine. And I think that, Alec also kind of serves fire and smoke. Because he's the devil.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm imagining like, what it looks like with Tess, like passing off these things and then being chucked into this machine and then gobbled up. And I'm thinking about what it's like with him, with Alec continually showing up. It's like he's trying to gobble her up as well. He's trying to, how in the beginning when she left, she said, "I would truly be your creature if I were to stay here." It's like he's trying to make her that creature. He won't stop until, and in this chapter is where he says almost as much, "Remember, I was your master once, I will be your master again. If you are any man's wife, you are mine."
Yes.
It's scary.
And this is where we have that line that I felt like was the key to Alec. "I am a different sort of fellow from that. If there's nobody to say, do this and it will be a good thing for you after you are dead. Do that and it will be a bad thing for you. I can't warm up. Hang it, I'm not going to feel responsible for my deeds and passions if there's nobody to be responsible to. And if I were you, my dear, I wouldn't either."
Ugh.
So that's the only thing that at all kept his behavior in check, is the idea that somebody's telling him, do this and it'll be a good thing for you after you're dead. Without that, there's no morality.
I'm just a machine that eats the things that are around me.
I have to say, one of my favorite phrases in these whole 5 chapters was just a brief phrase at the end of a sentence. And it was with the "I trouble you, I may ask, why do you trouble me?" And it says, it was with the line before, when she says, "Why do you trouble me?" It says, "There was reproach flashing from her very finger ends."
That's good.
Reproach flashing. I was in the car listening to this chapter again, and I had to try to recreate that, like what it would mean. I just imagine this tension where you're just so, and with your fingers crooked with stress and frustration, that how would you make reproach flash from your finger ends? So
Oh
it's
yeah, it's
both
good.
the idea of how far she's been driven to frustration, and then what it would mean for that to have to travel out to the ends of your fingers.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, that hadn't stuck out to me as much as it stuck out to you. But yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because that's a good one.
Yeah. It's like with Luke Travers, when he asks you to connect with a painting and he has you recreate the position yourself so that you can feel what I needed to feel, reproach flashing from my finger ends. I hope I don't have to feel that in life very often.
Right. Yeah.
Although
if you ever do, you'll have the exact right words to describe it.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. That's exactly right. Okay. 48.
48.
Did you have a title for 48? So 48, we've got the rat catching. We've got Alec coming back again with a new tack this time. And then we have Tess's letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
So sorry, you asked if I had a chapter title.
Yes.
I was kind of stuck between two. I've been toying with this idea of the metaphor, like threshing machine is to environment as Alec is to Tess. So it's described, the machine is described as the insatiable swallower in this chapter. So I kind of wanted to name it that because I think Alec is also kind of an insatiable swallower.
Yeah.
But I recognize that I might be pushing the metaphor. It might not actually be.
No, but that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
But so the other one that I chose was pressed to do what I will not do.
I feel like this is another example of you choosing the more benevolent spin on the same concept than I did, because I said save me from what threatens me.
I would, okay, no, between those two, I was going between those two.
That one too. I mean, it's just the reverse. So, I mean, okay, you've got your metaphor with the machine, but even the rat catching, like men are standing around observing this for sport. Dogs are barking, we could be thrown back to the hunting scene with the pheasants, and the women are tying up their skirts and screaming in fright and having rats, run.
Yeah.
Okay. So it just felt very much like the situation for women on the whole, that, they're unprotected from these,
these men trying to hunt them.
Yeah. From men trying to hunt them.
And then it's just this kind of image keeps coming back, like the idea of these animals being hidden in a smaller and smaller area, and then until they're finally uncovered and then killed.
Yeah. Okay, so I said Alec takes a new tack this time. He comes back, and this time he says, my religious mania, or whatever it was, is over, but I retain a little good nature. I hope I do. Now, Tess, by all that's tender and strong between man and women, trust me. I have enough and more than enough to put you out of anxiety, both for yourself and your parents and sisters. That's his key. I can make them all comfortable if you will only show confidence in me. So he knows that she's not going to accept help from him for her sake, but he knows that what might work is to use her family to get her to.
Yeah. And at one point, I forget if it's in this chapter or another, but he says, you don't know me yet, but I know you. And this is an example of that. He knows how to get to her.
And that is, it's interesting that it's at this moment that she writes the letter to Angel, asking him to save her from what's going to happen. So it seems like this has, maybe it's just simply the persistence and that he won't go away and he keeps reappearing, and she feels increasingly vulnerable, but it seems like she feels at her most vulnerable when he tries to get her to
Get
do
her
something for the
family.
sake of her family. Yeah.
Mhm.
So here at Shoshana, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because here we have pages of words from Tess. But so he's giving her words, but they're not Hardy style words for sure. They're more, I don't know, simple, innocent, pleading, confused,
Yeah.
not yeah, Shoshana.
Oh, she's trying so hard
Mhm.
because she remembers, that when she made her confession, he said, well, you're not the same person. And so
Yeah.
she, with her limited skills, she's trying to say, okay, I'm not the same person who sinned, but I am the same person who loved you. So
Mm.
can you give me credit for that? But the thing is, what he said didn't make sense anyway.
Mhm.
It didn't make sense anyway. I became another woman filled full of new life from you. How could I be the early one? Why do you not see this? If you would
Mhm.
only be a little more conceited and believe in yourself, so far to see that you were strong enough to work this change in me, you would perhaps be in a mind to come to me, your poor wife. Now,
Mhm.
what's weird is that it doesn't make sense,
Mhm.
but it's almost as if she's doing the sort of thing that Alec does and grabbing on something that the other person said and using that as an explanation, because
Mhm.
you get so impatient here. She could kind of go back to reality, because I know I wasn't there when you talked about it, but he did say you were more sinned against than sinning.
Mhm.
Okay, let's hold on to that for a minute.
Mhm.
All right, that if he can accept that she was more sinned against than sinning. In fact, well, we don't know what she told him, but okay, given that, how about you remember what you said and let's stick to that.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so this is not actually persuasive. It's sort of as if
No.
she's talking around things that he said and that she said. And then
So
she says ridiculous things. How silly I was in my happiness when I thought I could trust you always to love me. I should have known that such as that was not for poor me.
Mhm.
All right, if such as that is not for poor me, then stop writing the letter and go have a nice life.
Mhm.
It doesn't really make sense. Do you
Mhm.
remember like a chapter or so ago, Hardy told us that she's got these drops of logic that are getting through to Alec? Well,
Mhm.
that's kind of as well as she can do, is little drops,
Drops of logic. Yeah.
drops of
But
logic, because it's not
isn't
persuasive.
isn't Hardy trapped into, doesn't he still see her as the ideal, even in writing a letter like that? He has her trapped into, it seems like when we're using logic, then we end up spinning in circles like Angel was. What we have to do is, I guess, connect logic with those benevolent impulses of what it means to be a true human. So when you have that as your explicit philosophy, an incoherent letter is the best you can do to represent the ideal.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, the book's, it's sort of sad all the way through,
Mhm.
and you keep making up in your mind, but let's see, suppose there was some smarter, older brother who'd
Yeah.
kind of turn on the lights and say, all right, let's straighten this out, and what happened here and what ought to happen now. And Angel, I don't think that he lives up to being an angel. Alex certainly doesn't live up to being an angel. Maybe we should have a duel and the two of them would kill each other. Because really neither one of them is actually a good match for Tess, especially since Tess's love for Alec, she just doesn't love him at all, but it's obvious that she can't get rid of him.
She can't get
She can't get rid of him.
Okay, so this is so interesting. First, I just want to reference that his father calls him his misnamed angel. That's not for the same reason that we just called it the misnamed angel. But okay, that's fascinating, because
and you see, there's no God to help
I guess
either.
This is the issue of the dependence that women have on men. In his view, he couldn't create a character who had the strength to stand up to Alec and the strength to set Angel right, because part of what makes her the pure and ideal woman is her devotion to Angel, submissive devotion to Angel. I think that's essential to her goodness and her inability to, harshly judge so it seems like her beauty makes her vulnerable and her goodness is what makes her vulnerable. So the idea for writing this situation would be that men need to get their acts together. And then she's just dependent on that.
Well, we don't actually have any good men in the book, right? Okay, we've got some other possibly good women, honest women and
Honest women.
honest women, not harmful women, but they're not necessarily, the other milkmaids are honest. And I think that we kind of like them, but they're not wise and they can't straighten her out. Her father's no help. Her mother is worse than no help. There's no God in here to help her. You notice, that she's not actually religious. She's not asking for help from God. Angel is sort of the stand-in for God and he's inadequate. So, basically it's, as you see, she's found her tongue at last, but she even talks about his religion, right? It has been so much my religion ever since we were married to be faithful to you in every thought and look, that even when a man speaks a compliment to me before I am aware it seems wrong in you. Well, that's Tess all over. Someone gives her a compliment. Oh no, what did I do wrong? How can someone else giving her a compliment mean that she's being unfaithful to her husband?
Right.
Yeah. So
just like she's responsible for the horse right from the start.
Yes. Yes. I think.
But that again, it seems like Hardy thinks that's what makes her good, is that she bears all the responsibility for everything and never places blame on anyone else. So what makes her good makes her weak.
And to the idea that the letter is incoherent, I don't fully agree with that, because if you take it as the premise that like she is 100% devoted to her husband and the things that he says are truth, it is true to her that, he says you were one person and now you are another. She's trying to say, okay, well, if that's true, like you had the power to change me back. Like, if it's based on her complete simple devotion to her husband, and I'm not saying the word simple in a denigrating way, I just mean that that's simply what it is. So if it's based in that, then I think that the letter is coherent. It does make sense that she would send it. And that the things that she says in it are vulnerable and heartbreaking, and she's doing her best to just convince her husband to come home to her. I don't think that we're meant to be critical of her in this moment, especially not in her thought processes about.
No, I think we have to be careful or clear about which lens we're putting on. So it's like stepping outside of the world of the book and judging it from that perspective, or judging it from within Hardy's universe. And I think Hardy regards this as a beautiful letter. Simple, I think a little bit in both senses, a simple expression of devotion, but the simplicity is kind of childlike, which again, I think is something we're meant to regard as beautiful in her, that she has this kind of childlike innocence and unsophistication, because unsophistication is keeping you closer to the earth,
closer to goodness,
closer to the earth. But in reality, if we step outside of that, there's a lot that, the big brother figure might want to come in and, wake her up a little bit.
I think it's true that, there's no rescue coming, but the letter, even, it's naive, but that's not necessarily, she's basically saying that her goodness is in his keeping. And that's what Alec said. That's what Alec said. Look what you made me do. And I'm not going to be, you made me bad. And the only way for me to be good is for you. Well, I don't think Hardy thinks that's true. And it isn't true. It isn't true that other people make you good or bad. Whether or not you have full control over yourself, it certainly isn't true that when Alex says, you made me backslide, and your point. And here she's telling him, oh no, I'm being tempted. You need to come back to me or something awful is going to happen. Well, that's not really a good argument.
Mm,
You know, that's an Alec argument. And I think you're right in saying that Hardy doesn't want us to see her as another Alec, but
Mhm.
it's also true that here it's almost as if she's once again copying things that she's heard, and she really does want him to come back, but the argument kind of has to be something like, well, you know, to go back to what he said that actually had a point, that she was more sinned against than sinning.
Mhm.
And what she's said so far, she keeps saying things that don't make sense. There was a point where she said, well, look what you did.
mhm.
And he doesn't think that's a good argument because he thinks that's completely different. And she says something like, well, my mother says that sometimes men don't care when they find out. And that certainly is not a good argument. You know,
Mm.
basically she's had a few times when she's tried to make him not see that whatever she told him doesn't count. I think the only thing that would actually work would be something like the truth. You know,
Mhm.
I was asleep, he overpowered me.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah, but she doesn't, I don't think she tells him that.
no, but he does know that it was not willed by her. And that's what, well, next chapter, we
Yeah.
get to the next chapter, we can see
Yeah.
a change of heart from on Angel's part. But this is a really interesting question that seems to go to the heart of the book, is whether or not we're supposed to think anything critical of her here. And my inclination was, if I'm evaluating it in terms of, you know, what I would look for in a moral heroine, she certainly does not measure up. But it feels like the, I don't know, that the incoherence comes from a virtue in Hardy's mind, or if not a virtue, then just a fact of reality and nature, that this is, you know, what are womanly virtues
Mhm.
make you vulnerable in this way. So when she's, you know, she starts the letter by asking permission to call him husband. She says her punishment is deserved. She begs to come to him, him to come to her, not because she deserves it, but just out of kindness. And yeah, we look at that and say, no, but you do deserve it. And
Mhm.
he's being unkind, and he's the one in the wrong here and not you. But I still feel like we're supposed to admire her for taking that position and just being so loving and so devoted and so I don't know, willing to bear all burdens herself, that
Well,
apostolic quality.
sure. What
Mhm.
she doesn't want to do is to say, look what a mess you got me into.
Mm-mm.
She doesn't do that. And she's very careful about that. On the
Yeah.
other hand, looking forward, she says something really bad is going to happen unless you come and save me.
Yeah.
And that's putting a burden on him.
Mhm.
And well, in reality, it's not fair.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that
That Hardy
yeah,
agrees with that, or
the heart,
interesting.
yeah, because, well, it's, if it doesn't make sense for Alec to say, look what you made me do, it doesn't really make sense for Tess to say, look what you're about to make me do. If you don't come back really soon, something
Hmm.
horrible is going to happen. Save me from temptation.
Well, I mean,
Well,
she's a woman and Alec is
yeah.
a man. So
Yeah.
I think that that's a pretty important difference
In
that
Hardy's mind, it
Hardy's
is.
Yeah.
writing about. I mean, I don't, like, clearly I'm talking about the
You haven't
world of the
spoken to
book.
him directly, but yeah.
No. I'm talking about like the universe of this
Yeah.
book. It's a really big difference that Alec is a man and Tess is a woman.
Mhm.
Her,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
She says if she breaks down, it'll be worse than the first time.
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's sort of admitting that there was a first time that she's at fault for.
Mm.
And
But she still does believe that. She still
Mhm.
Yeah.
takes blame on herself for.
yeah, well, you see, but that's sort of what she and Alec need. She and Alec and she and Angel need to figure out, because Alec,
Mhm.
he's still, I don't think that he thinks she let him on.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I think it's probably better that Alec and Tess not start going down memory lane and thinking about what happened in, I don't think that would be constructive at this point, but it's still true that they never really straightened out everything. And I think that maybe that's maybe that's even the central thing here, is that Tess doesn't know. And that's why she needs to ask for help from other people in order to figure out what her own nature is. Maybe that's even, yeah, it's very interesting that Hardy's very concerned with her nature. Maybe that's why he wants to think of her as, the final word is that she's pure. But that's almost a negative term. That what happened to her and she didn't do it. I actually don't know. I think that he's clearly working hard to not go with the conventional view of, a fallen woman has to keep falling. Especially given the other people in the book. Anyway, what's interesting? Sometimes you know more when you spend more time with something, sometimes you know less.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that Hardy is a great soul, as we discussed. He has so many discrete, powerful, unforgettable observations and insights into human nature. Moral theorist doesn't seem to be what he can claim as his real talent. So he's rejecting something that I don't think the thing in its place is very well defined. It seems kind of vague and still Christian in spirit, but just not Christian in letters on a sign. I mean, still in letters to a certain extent, maybe just not that stark and simple. So yeah, her goodness is all the things that make her vulnerable, because he hasn't created a moral alternative for her that would allow her to stand up with strength and conviction and defiance. So I still feel like he does want us to view her as almost perfect, but that perfection means vulnerability by his moral standards, that perfection as a woman means weakness and vulnerability, because I mean, he's making women like children in a sense. They do have this dependence on men, and it's this kind of trusting worship. Love, the expression of love being trusting worship, seems like it's meant to be a thing we admire. And that there was that line where Angel said to her just after they were married, I think, and he said, wow, you're an emotional one, or I forget what the phrase was exactly, but you've got a lot of emotions. I'm gonna have to be really careful with how I take care of you. And of course he wasn't in any way, but I think that is what he was obligated to do, because she is by her nature as a woman dependent on him for that. Stephanie, you've been waiting a long time.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. That's actually a perfect segue into my question. But I had a question, but I just want to comment on what you just said, because it's relevant to my question.
Okay.
It kind of goes to show how hard it is to be a unique moralist.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And, I think Rand was able to take things from like Hugo and other people throughout philosophical and artistic history and be able to extract what was worthwhile and what wasn't. And so it's like really unfair, I think, to place a moral judgment on him. He's getting somewhere, but it just shows you how rare and unique someone like Rand is. But I guess my question is, it is a question about his morality. If being animalistic and just being in touch with like just human nature is the good, according to Hardy, then I wonder about Alec's decision to just, because that wasn't an intellectual decision. So I just wonder about that, because
maybe this is related to your question, because I was thinking about this before today's session too, that where does sex figure into all of this? Because it's such an evil force in this novel, but it's not, but the scenes where she and Angel, you know, have their first kiss, or it's not completely puritanical, but it does seem like, I don't know, there's still a Christian view of sex embedded.
Sex has
in
a
here
lurking
too.
quality in this book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
because he seems to have
temptation
a really good education on philosophy, seems to be interested in it, seems to know the difference between paganism and Christianity, and seems to have some admiration for both. And let me ask you this: do you think this is just like a off the cuff observation, but do you think that he thinks women should be emotional and men should be educated and philosophical?
It seems, I would say yes and no, because they should be more, I think he regards men as being, yes, more intellectual. But he seems to disparage logic and reason to a certain extent for men too, because we saw Angel being too caught up in thinking was his
Right.
problem.
That's right.
I don't know. What do you, Shoshana or Grace, do you have a thought about that?
I have a tangential question.
Mhm.
I wonder if, how to phrase the tangential question. I wonder if the point that Hardy's getting, like Stefan made me think of this when he said like paganism good, like
Mhm.
Christianity and society bad. I wonder if Hardy's point is not to be like paganism is the way to go, let's do it. More as just he's showing, like he might not even necessarily feel that way. That's more of an abstraction of society as it is makes women, good women like Tess, suffer. Anything that they do that is good makes them weak. An alternative is necessary. Here's one. And because it's so like poetic in its contrast, and you can illustrate it so well using the things that he has used. I wonder if the paganism isn't just like a stand-in for some alternative
It's
lifestyle.
it's
I don't know that it's a statement of his personal beliefs of what things ought to be.
Does he think it's like hedonism? Maybe paganism is hedonism or something. Like
I think it's a more humanistic Christianity. That's what he's trying to infuse Christianity with more natural compassion, instinctive.
Right. Yeah. He doesn't seem to think that Christianity itself is bad. He thinks that the people who navel gaze about Christianity make society bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't,
okay.
is that, I might have like derailed the question with my own personal question. So did I, or?
We're all lost in the abyss right now, I think.
Okay.
We're just trying to figure it out.
Well, we'll have to, so we're getting short of time too. So we want to get through the last couple chapters, and then maybe we can stop and try to regain a general, maybe we can go back to my earlier questions to kind of reorient us on the whole. But okay, so chapter 49, I called Who Was the Moral Woman? That was one title I came up with. Or He Was Wrong was my other title.
I like those. I like to pick phrases that I think lend a certain air of drama to the chapter titles. Yes. And I think sometimes it makes it so they don't quite get to the essentials. I still like them though. I'm still going to see them this way. I chose Love Renascent.
Oh, well, that's good. I like the word renascent too.
Yes. Did I pronounce that? I've never actually heard that said out loud.
It's a good one. We'll have to start throwing it into conversation. Okay, so I mean, let's just focus on the essential here. He love is renascent because he realized he was wrong, and he has a better understanding of who is the moral woman now. So it says, having long discredited the old systems of mysticism, he now began to discredit the old appraisements of morality. About time. He thought they wanted readjusting, really? Who was the moral man? Still more pertinently, yes, indeed, who was the moral woman? The beauty or ugliness of a character lay not in its achievements, but in its aims and impulses. Its true history lay not among things done, but among things willed. Okay.
And I think from our perspective outside the novel, we could find issue with that. But inside the novel, that's
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
That's great news.
And it does feel like it's taken him an awful long time to come
It
around
sure
to that.
does.
It took an encounter with some man who subsequently died and was sublimed by his death and influenced Claire more than all the reasoned ethics of the philosophers. So yes, he has realized that, I forget, there was another phrase in that chapter for it too, but basically that, let's see, illegal surrender was not certain disesteem. So yes, he realizes that she is not to blame and that she could be considered the moral woman.
Yeah.
Thus, from being her critic, he grew to be her advocate. Cynical things, oh, this is another phrase that I just love so much. Cynical things he had uttered to himself about her, but no man can be always a cynic and live. And he withdrew them. The mistake of expressing them had arisen from his allowing himself to be influenced by general principles to the disregard of the particular instance. Now, again, that is not a solution to the problem of morality, to say what you need to do is ignore general principles and instead focus on the particular instance. I see the idea of it here, that if you were actually looking at and feeling connected with and understanding Tess, you would see that it is not possible to blame her morally in this situation. But again, this is the problem, I think, with his formalizing a moral alternative, is that he's saying it needs to be basically Christian principles combined with some kind of natural conscience, connection to natural human conscience. And that's the answer. That's a hard thing to define explicitly.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one thing that's been interesting to me in rereading this, I don't think there's a spoiler in this comment, is that it again I again love the mother and father. You know, when the mother criticizes the father as an exception, something she never does, it says, because she was as considerate as she was devout. See, that's that combination of human compassion, instinctive human compassion, and devotion to principle. So she was as considerate as she was devout. The father was troubled by doubts about his justice to his misnamed angel. But we haven't seen them in the position of having to do anything to demonstrate to us that that's actually how but we've seen it repeatedly said that
we know, because we trust Hardy that they would have done something for Tess had
they would have done,
but
we haven't seen them actually do it.
It's almost like just to bother us, right?
Yeah.
Like just to make us feel worse reading this.
If she had rung the doorbell and they were at home,
everything would have been different.
Everything would be fine. I mean, maybe it is a little bit to remind us of the capricious evil of
the universe. Yeah.
Everything is always conspiring to interfere with.
Well, and I wonder if like the role of fate in this novel isn't just another way that Hardy is not, making a statement about fate in this universe, but more talking about the evils of society. Like a woman that is pure is fated to suffer in a society like this. It's like, if you are living in a society like this, sorry, I'm doing that thing where I talk really fast. If you are living in a society like this and you're pure, you are fated to suffer, because that's the way society is. It's like constructed against purity. That's just a theory. We can talk probably more about it after we finish the book.
Yeah. Well, I remember long ago asking, is is the evil society? Is it just a malevolent universe per se because of the blighted star comments and all of that? And I remember you at the time saying you had a definite idea about that, but we'd have to get through the novel. And it's becoming, as I go through it again, it is becoming clearer to me, I think. But we'll save it. Next reading is our last reading, so we can save that commentary for when it comes to a close.
Yeah.
All right. So from being her critic, he has now become her advocate.
Mm-hmm. And then the image of her working while singing that song, the ditty,
Mm-hmm.
arise, 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 and pick your love a posy, while she's
Mhm.
crying and like trying to be far away so that she can practice singing for him if he can
Now,
return.
this
If
is
he
an
returns. That image hurts me.
this if we step back and look at this moment, it's extraordinarily painful because he has become her advocate, just as Alec has been stalking her mercilessly, and now her father is dead. We'll just skip right ahead to that in the
To that.
next chapter.
Mhm.
And now her father is dead. He is the only one with a claim to the farm. If they were in desperate poverty, I loved the phrase when they ate the seed potatoes, and it says it was the last lapse of the improvident,
Yeah.
driven to the desperation of eating the seed potatoes and having no thought to the future. I mean, not just, acting on desperation and undermining any possibility of coming out of the desperate situation. And then Alec appearing like the devil
Over
in
the
that
fire. Oh my gosh.
fire. So the having those two moments juxtaposed, Angel, oh, I am now her advocate. I've come to realize that she is not to be blamed, while Alec stalks her in her moment of most weakness, greatest weakness and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a title for 50?
Yes, I chose Flux and Reflux.
Yeah, that was one of two for me. The other was Eve and the other one.
Oh, I was choosing between those two. That's so funny.
So he is there,
Yep.
waiting to take advantage.
Stalking her, hunting her.
When she is at her most vulnerable.
And she's a rat under the last layer of sheaves.
Or a rabbit. She's a rabbit, not a rat.
Agreed. Yeah.
The rats attack the women, so.
Right. She's not that. She's a rabbit cornered in the ever decreasing field.
Yeah. One phrase I just have to mention from 50 again, because this is, Hardy has throwaway phrases. I mean, I'm sure he didn't consider them throwaway, and that's not a fair description, but they're just phrases buried within sentences that make me stop and go, oh my God, that's genius. It captures something that I know I've never formulated. Okay, so one of those for me was when it says that when the child announces that their father is dead, it says the child realized the grandeur of the news, but not yet its sadness.
Yes.
You know that moment? I mean, it's not just true of children, it's true of all human beings, where you might be struck first by just the scope or scale of the fact. And it's only later that you're able to feel the emotional impact of it.
Absolutely.
I know that so well, but that it was captured so perfectly there. Realize the grandeur of the news, but not yet its sadness.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I loved about this chapter was just, he goes on for a while, just like describing the night where she's doing work on their family's plot. He describes her person, and then he describes the area. And I know we're running short on time, but I want to share it because they're really wonderful. She was oddly dressed tonight and presented a somewhat staring aspect, her attire being a gown bleached by many washings with a short black jacket over it, the effect of the whole being that of a wedding and a funeral guest in one. And then when he's describing the environment, I just love I've never been in a place like this, but I feel like I can see it. Something in the place, the hour, the crackling fires, the fantastic mysteries of light and shade made others as well as Tess enjoy being there. Nightfall, which in the frost of winter comes as a fiend and in the warmth of summer as a lover, came as a tranquilizer on this March day. How does he think of these amazing words? Oh, and a Jupiter hanging like a full-blown daffodil, so bright as almost to throw a shade.
Yeah. Night coming on like a lover in summer.
Oh,
It's summer now. I'm going to remember that phrase.
oh yeah.
All right. So let's go back quickly in the last 2 minutes of our conversation. We can take a little more if anybody wants to those questions of what makes her pure. It turns out they were sounds like they're more complicated questions than I even realized, but what makes her the pure woman? Well, part of it seems to be her unfailing generosity of spirit, always taking blame on herself for everything, never assigning blame to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it seems to be her purity in regard to sex, in the sense that you pointed out in the first chapter, that for her, it is never something she uses as a tool or is even conscious of. I guess she's not even conscious of her own allure until it becomes a problem, a persistent problem for her, and then she tries to hide it. It's something that belongs to her husband.
Right.
She says, in that letter, she talks about, people commenting on her beauty, and she says her beauty gives her only pleasure in the idea that it belongs to Angel.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What is it that makes her good? Her connection with nature, her innocence, her simplicity, in a way, just having kind of earnest impulses of conscience and not formal moral rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm a little distracted because I'm trying to find the part where he goes back home after they separate, and they're reading the that passage from the Bible where they're talking about what a pure woman is. I think she fits each one. So I think that she fits the spirit of each one, if not the concrete particular of it. So that's what I'm looking for. But so far, everything that you've said.
And then her capacity for total devotion. I mean, when she loves to love wholly and devotedly. And it is true that all the things, or many of the things that make her good, make her vulnerable and weak in a sense. And so she, it's funny because it makes it we've got the pure woman, not the pure man. We've got the pure woman. I guess this goes back to Shoshana's point before. We don't really have an idealized man in this universe. We have the pure woman, and then we have Alec, I think, just as pure evil. I don't think there's anything redeeming about him at all. He's just predatory, impulse driven by his lust, excuse making and rationalizing of everything he does, using morality almost, I guess, maybe in a moment to make him feel better about himself, but then also to justify further predatory behaviors. I feel like he's using his sense of duty just to get his hands on Tess again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like they're on the opposite ends of the scale. Like she's perfect and pure, and he is
the worst.
And evil is the worst. Satanic. He's the worst.
Yeah. And then Angel just seems like the stand-in for society that Well, no, that's not right. That's not
I
right.
don't know if I
Is
agree.
society changing?
What's that?
Like Angel kind of
Yeah.
seems like maybe the bridge to society
I
as
guess-
it's going to be.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. What I was going to say is Angel is society's potential, but still contains the actual of society.
Right, that's a good way to put it.
He does adopt the standards of society, and that's what makes him criticize and condemn her, because he doesn't look at the particular, he just looks at the general principle. So he's still kind of mindlessly embracing those standards of society, which he thinks he's rejected, but he hasn't entirely. But he contains within him a capacity that we see to be society as it might be if he became more connected to those particulars, if he more wholly rejected what ought to be rejected what ought to be rejected, and didn't just absorb part of it. And it sounds like he rejected the mysticism but accepted the morality. I think that was the phrase in this section. So had he more successfully questioned the morality, then he might be the sort of man who could protect Tess.
Right.
One thing though, I don't know if I would say he's mindless though. And Stefan's point made me think that he doesn't have the words, or he's not equipped with the morality to properly be critical of it. So it's hard from my perspective to put myself in his shoes, but I can also imagine, well, what could he say in this world? How does he even have the words or the ideas to defend it?
It's true that he doesn't have the words, but I still don't think Hardy presents him as sympathetic in that regard. It was a failing of his that he looked in Tess's face and scorned her. I think Hardy regards that as being a real moral failure on his part. So it's not just, oh, well, if only he had the words, he'd be able to defend it. It was wrong. What he did was wrong, but it's true that he doesn't have the words for it. And it's true that he has to go through this journey and meet this man on the road to try to find some words for it. But there is language in previous chapters that says, I don't mean to call him mindless on the whole, but to the extent that he kind of passively absorbed those principles that he's now imposing on Tess. There was a passiveness to that. There was a failure to that. And I think we are meant to criticize and condemn him for that. Shoshana, did you?
Yeah, I think the more I think about it, I think that Alec is the clearest case. Okay,
Yeah.
we know all about him. And I think that in this chapter we were just reading where he's quoting Paradise Lost as, that's very clear, because
calling himself the devil.
Calling himself the devil. And and I mentioned it earlier because that's sort of the way that Milton's devil works, is that he knows how to play Eve and what to say in order to appeal to her. But if you remember, I'm sure you remember that the motive of Satan in Paradise Lost, he was trying to hurt God. That's what that was about, is that I'm going to ruin your fine creation. Okay, I'm going to hurt you through ruining your earth and your pure beings. And so it's as if we've said it 10 million times that her goodness makes her a victim, but that's actually not just true from the way things work out, but from the way that his mind works. That's I mean, he's got all those other women in his life. Does he keep appearing like Jaws to threaten them? No, she's the good one. And from a certain perspective, she is in a different class from all those other women. So I think the Alec part's clear. And if you look at her from the standpoint of what Alec is out to destroy, well, that's part of what he's out to destroy, is her purity and etc. Now, the funny thing about Angel is that he's the one who's not as clear for us, and he's almost more like a surrogate for the reader, except the readers read the whole book, so we know what really happened more than he does. And maybe that's even why Hardy is working so hard to say pure. She really is pure, and don't you judge her negatively because of what you've read or what you thought. No, you do better than Angel. Do better than Angel. There's some sense in which I think Hardy if he'd made Angel the main character,
Mhm.
he might have told us more about what's going on with Angel, because maybe he's also someone for whom there's more to be said than this
Yeah,
snapshot,
that is,
this one
I would
moment.
like to step back and think about why he structured things the way he did, because when Angel reappears, I wrote in the margin of my book, he's back.
Yeah.
He's been gone. He's been absent for so long, absent from our perspective of what is happening. What is he thinking? And then he just appears and we hear retrospectively that he's had this change of heart and this redemption. So it is interesting. I'll have to think about this before
Yeah.
next session, why we're seeing everything from the perspective of Tess. Maybe by doing that, he's just making us feel the pain of her dependence on these people, because having him absent makes us constantly wonder, is he going to come around? And it really, you do feel that frustration of her, or even the walk to his parents' house. You're always suffering along with her dependence on the reactions of the people around her.
Mhm.
All right, well, next week we will discuss the novel's end.
Okay.
Then we'll have to figure out what to do next. Thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.